So obviously the pension issue is the number one priority because it affects the budget. The budget's always the number one priority. And it's kind of generational because it's not just a solution that would help us in this year, but it would, if we get a solution, it'll help us for, literally the next generation. And I've learned a lot about it in the last couple of years, and Eric is, on his own, did a bunch of research dealing with the Constitution, which is a critical part of understanding what the solution is. At the end of the session, the previous General Assembly, we had meetings with the four leaders and the governor, and at that point in time, what was proposed to me was that Tom Cross and Lane Neckrits had a bill that they wanted to pass over to the Senate, and they wanted to make sure that the Senate would consider it and that I would support it. And I basically told them that I thought that the bill was unconstitutional, but that if it actually passed, I wasn't going to kill it in committee. We'd just sign it, get it out on the floor, and we'd vote on it, because it would have passed the House. But I was particularly concerned about passing a bill which is, I think, is unconstitutional, and at the same time pretending like we did something, and then a year later find out that we literally wasted another year. Now, I'm not on the Supreme Court, obviously, so I'm not going to say for sure. But I have pointed out some things in the past that I thought were unconstitutional, where I was right, once where I was wrong. So you just never know. But I offered an alternative, and that was, I said, okay, so how about if we pass your bill? They're now calling it the Neckrits-Biss Cross Bill, NBC. That's what the advocates like to call it, the NBC bill. I said, well, why don't we make your bill the law, but that if for some reason the court throws it out, we have a backup that's already been passed, that's built into the law. I don't want to have to pass your bill, have the Supreme Court throw it out a year later, and then go back to this legislature, special session or whatever, and continue to fight the opponents on a second bill. If we're going to do this, let's do it once. That's what made sense to me. So I made that offer, and Tom Cross rejected it, and he said that his lawyers would tell him that, having the backup in the same law kind of undermines the credibility of the first one, which I just don't agree with. I don't think Eric agrees with it. It's unusual, but not common, but it has been done. Eric's done research, found 3 states where something just like that has been done. We have some...
Or with some other subject?
In one case, with other subject. In Missouri, it was the death penalty. So the death penalty was thrown out by the Supreme Court. The Missouri legislature passed what they thought was a constitutional version of reinstating it, and then a backup. In the case of in Illinois, in the case of the capital bill, there was a lawsuit filed by Wirtz. The capital bill had a bunch of laws that went into effect. It wasn't about its constitutionality, was it? I don't think, but it was about this becomes law if another bill becomes law. So you can condition something on some other thing happening. So there's no question that this is, albeit unusual. So I offered to do that, and that was rejected. But I wasn't sure why. So I offered Senate Bill 1, and just to go through the arguments for this, the Part A, it's got a Part A and a Part B, and the Part A is the NBC bill, and they claim that they want this because they want to save more money. The Part B doesn't save enough money. And they would argue, I guess, that it's constitutional because a couple of arguments. One is that the police powers of the state allow for us to do something just because we're in such dire straits we can do it. And the second would be there's something in that bill for someone, and that being a guaranteed funding of pensions going forward. And I guess the acceptance part, because in a contract there's offer, acceptance, and there has to be consideration. The acceptance part would be the fact that we passed the law and we kind of told everybody you're accepting it And I'll let Eric, Eric's not very objective at
Is it also,
defending.
though, that they agreed to fund the pensions going forward? And
That would be the
solid-
consideration. Yeah, that's a consideration. You're getting something. Okay, so,
Before you go on, what is their savings versus your savings? What's the difference today?
well, in our savings, remember, people have an option.
Yeah, it's a range.
And so it's a range. And so the range is, we were basing our numbers on TRS, which is more than half of the system, having a certain return on their investments, and then they lowered those returns to 8%. And that increased the amount of the savings that our bill would come from. So the last figures I remember was 66 and 88 billion.
Correct.
Was the range, but it's probably higher.
Correct.
We haven't had the adjustment to the TRS. But let's just say at a minimum, 66 if nobody takes the deal. If you know what the deal is, I'll explain it. And 88 billion if everybody takes the deal. I can explain what the deal is in a second. And then, what do they say the NBC bill saves? There's two numbers. There's the reduction in unfunded liability, and then there's the how much less money you have to pay into the system over the next 30 years.
Yeah.
Okay? Theirs is significantly higher by a 50%, I think.
Yeah, and the
It's
numbers,
almost 100, isn't it?
the numbers they
No.
had were from December.
Yeah.
So, and when it got to us by January, it had become watered down a little bit.
Right.
So the savings from the unfunded liabilities between 27 and 28 billion. And then it was in the $120 billion range over 30 years.
And ours could be as high as 88, but then that's higher because of this new adjustment. So, I would say it could be, let's say it's 95 billion to 120 billion. That's the difference.
One more thing on the savings before I leave it, I'm sorry. Are they setting 120 at the floor? Is that what has to be saved to be acceptable to them? Or why isn't 66 or 88 good enough? How much do we have to throw
Well,
at public employees on this?
Yeah, well, you'll have to ask them that, because that's their plan. I'm putting it in my bill for a couple reasons. First of all, it's to help pass anything, okay? So we have, first of all, I'm not in the Supreme Court, and then secondly, I'm putting it in there to help pass the bill. So if some people are going to vote against Part B because it doesn't save enough, well, I say, well, Part A is your bill. So everybody's for Part A, vote for it, because it's Part A. Now, I would point out that in the House, they never actually called the NBC bill, because they didn't apparently have enough people to even come close to passing it. So this whole thing becomes kind of moot, if they can't pass it. Whereas in the Senate, we actually passed a version of Part B. And by the way, the only reason why we didn't call last May, Senator Rodonio and I only called 2 systemes, because the other 2 were still subject to the negotiations over this cost shift issue. Well, at the request of Senator Rodonio, I've agreed to defer that, not come back to it. She's in good faith negotiating with us on the cost shift. But for now, we can take these 4 systems. We can talk about the judges in a second as well. We got these 4 systems that would all be subject to our version of how this thing should go that saves upwards of $88 billion. Okay? And that's in the same bill. So the argument would be, you go with Part A, because that's your bill and that saves the most money, and we'll help pass it for you. And if the Supreme Court upholds it, God bless you, it's the law. We get all the savings. If they throw it out, then we have Part B. And Part B is constitutional because you are giving people a choice. They literally would sign a contract, and they're given a choice. And it might be a Hobson's choice, but it's a choice nonetheless, where you say, give up your compounded COLA. We want you to give up your compounded COLA. We passed it in 1992. We can't afford it. That's what's driving the cost. That's the only thing we have to really ask you to sacrifice, and if you do, we're going to save all this money. And if you do that, you're going to get something. That's the consideration. What you're going to get is a guarantee of something that you thought you already had, but you didn't. That is access to health insurance. Access, not a guarantee of today's health insurance program, just access. Whatever's offered, you'll have access to it for retirement. And then secondly, all your pay raises for the rest of your career will be added on to your salary so that when you retire, that'll be the form that we use for your retirement. Well, people would have said, well, I thought that was the law. Well, it is, but we could change the law. You could, in the future, literally say your salary's frozen for the purposes of your pension at today's salary. A 25-year-old school teacher, work till you're 66. When you retire, your retirement income is based on what you were making when you're 25. So with that as a choice, we're hoping that especially the younger people, the actives, 2/3 of which are under 13 years on the job, both teachers as well as state employees, we would hope that they would sign up for the deal. Okay? And they
Is
would.
that 2/3 of all of the pensioners in the 5 systems, or just 1 or 2 systems? Or?
I think it's TRS and SERS.
And they're under what?
Under 12 years, under 13 years of service, right?
Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah. So, if the retirees want to give up their health care because it's not a big deal, their spouse has health care that they just don't use because the state's health care is a better deal. If they're Medicare eligible, they get a wraparound from the state now. Maybe they can give that up because they figure their compounded COLA is more generous. So they would have a choice. There's the uncertainty of Obamacare, but it's going to happen, and it might. And there's also the fact that the state, our health insurance, the one that I have, is probably not going to be as generous as it is now. So it gives them a choice. It's constitutional, and it saves a lot of money. And it basically stabilizes the cost of the pension system going forward as a percentage of our GRF budget at about 15%.
And it's constitutional because?
It's a contractual change. The Constitution, I don't know if we have it in here. Do we have it in here?
Yeah.
In the beginning or the end?
It should be on page 4. Page 4 of your handout.
Yeah, I know the language of the Constitution. I'm trying to figure out why it's not. I just want to know why it's constitutional.
And I want to focus on it.
Okay.
So it's contractual relationship.
Uh-huh.
Membership in a pension system is contractual. That means it can be altered. You can voluntarily change your contract with the state. So if you're a retiree, and I think you probably are, you have a contract with the state, and if you want to change it by saying, you know what, I'm going to give up my compounded COLA to make sure I have access to health care going forward. I don't know.
What if I don't want to do either?
You have to do one or the other.
I know, that's painful.
Because you don't have a choice. Well, then that means we're passing a law that's taking away your health care.
Yeah, no, I'm
We can do that.
still kind of stuck on the choice.
Well, that's why this is important. Let's talk about it. You don't have a constitutional right to access to health care. You have a constitutional right to keep your compounded COLA. So if you don't want to give up your constitutional right to your compounded COLA, you don't have to. So we're giving you a choice. We're going to take away your access to health care. And if you're a 25-year-old teacher, we're not going to give you any of your pay raises as part of your final pension unless you give up your compounded COLA, which was enacted in 1992. Well, because it didn't mean anything at the time. We had plenty of money. So that's why it's contractual, and if it's contractual, it can be changed.
Okay.
Okay? And you'll have an individual choice. In Part B, in Part A, it's just a law that takes away a lot of your benefits.
So this only applies to people who are active in the system?
And retirees.
So the retiree also has to choose?
Because you have access to health care.
And healthcare.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, there's no pay raises that you have to worry about because you've already retired. You're not giving up your pay raises. Okay? So it's a clever response to a particular problem, which is a problem that people call it a problem, in that there's a constitutional right to your pension. And Eric's research shows that the people at the Constitutional Convention knew exactly what they were talking about. It was more underfunded then than it is now. And the people in the Constitutional Convention, they knew what they were doing. They said, we got to put this in here so in the future the legislature doesn't take away our pension rights.
On that point, we've kind of outed ourselves as buying into Eric's analysis. There are a lot of people who don't, who said, oh, it's all the same. We don't really know what the Supreme Court's going to do. Here's my lawyer who says this and this and this, and our approach is constitutional. Why do you believe his analysis is more solid than these
Well,
other
I think I'm
lawyers?
beyond that part of the argument by saying, okay, I'll pass your part.
Well, you are.
I'll pass your unconstitutional, and I'll be polite. I won't even call it unconstitutional while I sponsor it. Now, I'm not. No, this is important. I'm not. Part of the deal is we're not going to. We're not trying to. We're not trying to undermine, the arguments that they can make. They have brilliant lawyers who are going to make this argument.
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, this isn't just This is a bipartisan problem and a bipartisan solution. The reason people say, well, you got 40 members, why don't you just pass this? Why don't I'll tell you what, if all the Republicans vote for it, I'll give you 11 votes, right? But it's a bipartisan problem because there's bipartisan opposition. It's a combination of, let's take this area here. You got a lot of state employees who are retired or who work here who are affected by this. If you represented this district, it'd be tough to vote for anything. Downstate, AFSCME represents prison guards, a lot more state employees downstate than there are probably even in Chicago. So, and they're represented by Republican state senators. I understand why they're voting no, but it's not a Democratic problem or, Republican problem. It's a problem for the whole state. It's the crowding out that's happening, and as a result, it affects everybody in the state. That's what we're trying to solve the problem. But it cannot be solved just by one party putting out a bunch of votes. And that's why the beauty of the bill we passed in May was that it was a bipartisan effort. 30 votes, 16 Democrats, 14 Republicans. We may or may not have been able to get a few more, but certainly not 30 votes by just Democrats.
Do you think you'd have Republican votes for Senate Bill 1?
Oh, yeah. I have Senator Radogno, and I've met. We met at some length going over the bill. She's very serious about this. Very, very policy driven. We went through roll calls on who might be for it, who might be against it. We're working together to try to pass the bill.
So you think the compounded COLA is part of the constitutional contract?
Oh, definitely.
Even though it was not
Whatever.
later statutory?
Right.
Once you add it, it's in.
Once you add it, it's in. That's our interpretation of the Constitution.
She was complaining, not Joan, but Radogno was complaining about JRS not being in there.
Yeah, there's an answer. There's a reason for that, and it's complicated.
Our readers hate that, by the way. They think that's a bribe. That's what they call it.
Yeah, it's not. It has to do with the Constitution. You may recall a little incident. In fact, talking about the Constitution. Pate Phillip was the President of the Senate. We passed a bill on the last day of session that suspended or abolished our COLAs for the year, for the General Assembly and the judges. And I voted for it. The head of the Judges Association contacted me shortly thereafter and said, you can't do that to judges because there's a provision in the Constitution, as it should be, that says judges' compensation shall not be diminished. The legislature has a separate provision in the Constitution that says our salaries cannot be changed. I'm sure the framers of the Constitution meant by that they can't be raised while you're in your term. The provision in the Constitution dealing with judges is their salaries shall not be diminished. Because you can imagine the legislature has a ruling thrust upon them by the Supreme Court that they don't like. We can run over there and say, okay, yeah, now you guys are working for $1 a year. So the Constitution says you can't diminish the judge's salary. Okay? Well, then I passed a law to repeal that provision as it related to the judges. Blagojevich vetoed it and said, sue me, you know where the courtroom is. Well, some judges did sue, and the court ruled, it was awkward because it affected every one of them, but they said, yeah, our COLAs are part of our salary, and for you to repeal it is reducing our salary during our term, okay? So the problem is that when you do my consideration argument here, you can't tell the judges that you can't, that we're going to freeze your salary if you don't give up your compounded COLA, okay? The second thing to remember with judges is we totally whacked the judges in the Tier 2 pension reform more than anybody, because judges are some of the highest paid state employees, and we limited their COLA to Social Security.
Yeah, 108 or something.
Yeah, 106 at the time. I think it goes up a little bit. So it wasn't that we weren't afraid to take on the judges, and they went nuts. And judges, called me and complained. And I said, hey, this is for new judges. If we find that nobody wants to run for judge in the future, we'll change it. And that wasn't the case. So it's not that we want to bribe them. It's not that we want. And the other thing is that there's only 950 judges in the state, 942 judges in the state. There's very few of them in the system. So it's not where the money is. Money's in TRS, SERS, SURS. So now, just real briefly, if you want to just look at this thing that I put here, just to visualize the crowding out. So you see the blue is budget for education.
You have
The blue is education.
For you, it's one.
one?
Okay. The red is the percentage of the GRF. So it went up. It was going up from 05 through 09, and in the last 5 years in a row, it's gone down. The next slide I just throw in there for people who, at every town meeting you go to, they say, I thought the lottery was supposed to take care of education. This just shows how much you spend on education. $36 billion when you throw everything in, state, local, federal, and then of course the lottery, 600,000, which if you didn't have it would be 600,000 short. The next one is the blue is the just P12 preschool, and that doesn't throw in higher ed. And you see the same thing that we showed before, but it also shows you the increase in the pensions. Now, the pension payment for the next fiscal year, it's already been certified. It's over $1 billion.
$1 billion more than was last year.
Yeah, and last year was $950 million more than the previous year. And this is, by the way, no matter what we pass, this has already been certified. And this is going out the door. This is continuing appropriation off the top. So I don't know what our revenue growth is going to be, but let's say it's half of this. That means there's another $500 million that has to be cut from the budget somewhere. And where it's cut is from we've already cut Medicaid. You can't cut your debt payment. Where it's going to be cut is from higher ed, elementary and secondary, human services, or state government, where we cut $651 million last year. And these are real cuts, like state cuts, not like federal cuts where they cut the rate of increase. This is less money. This next chart just shows you what the pension reform that we did pass did. That's the Tier 2. So, I mean, we saved $71 billion over 30 years. This was not reported on in the Chicago media market, by the way, because we did it quietly. When we do things that they don't report on, they call it, we did it quietly. We talked about the Constitution. The COLA, Joan, you like this chart? I don't know what your pension is, but if it was $50,000 and you retired when you're age 60, when you're 90, and I'm sure you will be, you'll be making $121,000 on your pension that started off at 50 if it's a compounded COLA. And by the way, this might be one of the reasons why you want to give up your access to your health care because you don't want to lose out on this green line, which shows you that starting at about age 67, it starts to accelerate. If you keep your, oh, by the way, we're not taking away your COLA. You still get a simple COLA, which is the blue line, which grows from 50,000 to 95,000. And by the way, we're checking with all of the unions that have the construction trade union pensions. They apparently don't have the concept of a COLA. They have reductions in their pension benefits when the stock market tanks.
Do you remember the reason why the COLA in 1992 was compounded?
You know, I mean,
The history?
the history was probably Henry Bair was around and he came in and got the General Assembly to pass a benefit for pensions.
Wasn't that in exchange for not taking?
Well, whatever it is,
was?
they always say
For not
it's in
taking a
exchange
raise
for
that year or
something, but then,
We're cutting, so we probably don't.
yeah, but it's so we pass a benefit that is locked into the Constitution for everybody's lifetime in exchange for 1 year of, I don't have a lot of sympathy for those folks who claim that we underfunded the pension systems because they were in there lobbying for more money for the school aid formula or paying their contracts that they negotiated with huge benefits or more money for higher ed. I mean, they weren't lobbying for, they actually signed a witness slip. Radonio has that she waves around about take a pension holiday and but give us more money for our potential pay raises. Anyway, this is the COLA, which I think is very interesting. Senate Bill 1 we talked about. It's Part A and Part B.
So the cost shifting would only be in Part A?
There's no cost shift.
There's no cost shift.
There's no cost shift. We can talk about that in a second. But that's to help pass something. Cost shift is even more complicated. Still want to do it, still have to do it. It's basic public policy that has to be changed. Okay, so you have the choices here where you agree to a lower COLA, you keep access to the health care program, and your salary increases are pensionable. Or you say, no, I want to keep my COLA, I've already got health care through my spouse, and I've already retired. So, the unfunded liability reduction happens immediately, and then, of course, at the end of 30 years, the unfunded liability goes away to zero. And the reduction in the $66 to $88 billion, that's reflected in lower payments into the pension system every year.
So are you going to go ahead and move this in committee tomorrow?
No, not yet, but soon. Senator Radonio and I just met last week, and we haven't even had a caucus yet with the new members. You know, the new members, we're having our first caucus tomorrow, so we have to start educating our own members. We're going to show this to our own new members. We have 16 new members in the Senate, so these guys a lot of them are not familiar with, they're certainly not familiar with the crowding out effect of the state budget because they haven't seen a state budget yet. Except for Senator Menard might be pretty familiar with the state budget.
And this might be.
Sorry?
This.
Well, Biss and Cunningham were in the House. So, but there's still 13 freshmen, true freshmen.
In your meetings with Henry Bair that were revealed last week by the Speaker's letter, what was he able to offer anything on COLAs or anything beyond the talking points that we heard in these committee hearings where he's testified? What were they saying to you?
He spends a lot of time blaming the General Assembly for underfunding it.
Yeah.
Forgets about the fact that he wasn't asking for more money himself, but rather was negotiating, some would say, generous contracts, eating up the money instead of putting it in the pension fund. He talks about cutting loopholes and raising $2 billion worth of taxes and then giving it to him instead of spending it on human services or a capital bill. And then he says, but we need shared sacrifice, so we're willing to increase our contribution by 2%, phased in. That 2%
raise.
represents about $5 billion. So we're talking about saving 66 to 88. His 2% raises about $5 billion. And if we actually did it, if it was part of the deal, it might have the opposite effect of encouraging people to give up their compounded COLA. Because some young teacher might say, I don't want to take a pay cut and take 2% of my payroll. So it's a tricky thing with this choice thing, but what we really...
You still have to do a choice under his model because you believe that just negotiating with those guys isn't enough.
That's a very good point. I mean, they're offering, they say, pass a law saying we have to increase our COLA by 2, or by our contribution by 2%. Somebody could sue.
Someone's not everybody's a union member.
Not very many that are left that are not, but
Yeah.
there are a few.
Well, the retirees aren't union members now, but yeah.
Right.
So are you going to their pension summit?
Well, I think I was going to send somebody.
Regardless, you're going to have a presence there.
Yeah, to make
Like
these...
Mr. Madigan.
Well, I don't know if he's going to send anybody or not, but yeah, I mean, it's frustrating when they pretend like we weren't meeting. I mean, we were meeting at the mansion with Mr. Sturmer and the teachers and unions, both teachers' unions and Henry.
So what is the effect on the entire process that Madigan sent the letter and they responded and everybody looks like they're just not getting along at all?
Well, we haven't been getting along at all because the unions are opposed to any changes to the law that would even go anywhere towards solving the problem. But we've been meeting with them. I went out to meet with the IEA for 2 hours with their, I'm not sure what the name of their board is, but there were like 20 of them, and started with the budget, showed them the budget. Everybody, they're nice people, everybody's here, there's slices of the pie, the budget, and everybody's concerned about their piece of the pie. But for us, they have to add up. At the end, they have to all add up. And so when you show them, pensions are now, when you count the debt service, and by the way, thank God we borrowed money to pay the pensions for those 2 years. We must be paying less than 5%. The stock market went from, what was it, down to 6,000? Now it's up to 14,000. So thank God we borrowed those 2 years, but we are paying off those bonds. So when you add that to the money we're putting in every year, we're literally spending more money on pensions than we are on preschool through high school.
So if they're not cooperating at all, what will happen? Just have to be imposed by
We get
law?
30 votes by getting 16 and 14.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
it's that simple.
So in light of what you just said, that the unions don't, they want to blame everybody else, and, they don't want to lose anything. Ralph Martiri had a recent
Okay.
proposal of stretching out the pension, re-amortizing it through 2057 and making it a flat payment of 6.something billion dollars a year, $6.9 billion dollars a year, and letting everything else ride. I mean, not reducing any benefits,
Yeah.
none of the things that are being talked about.
Did Ralph say where he wanted to get the first year's payment?
Well, it's a little more than what you show in your budget.
When you say a little more,
6.9,
yeah.
6.2.
He didn't put it in the column, but he told me on the phone that he thought you guys should expand the sales tax and services to help. I think that, yeah. But, what is the problem with that? I mean, state employees love that idea because they have no pain.
Of course.
Yeah.
So what,
And if you did the cost shift, eventually it would even...
well, they're against that too. Yeah, the ARC, the actuarially required contribution of 30 years was what they asked for in our negotiations, didn't they? For it to be the unions.
Correct.
The longer you spread it out, the more you pay in interest. It's certainly something we could consider, but you can't. The numbers don't work if you don't have some reduction in the benefits, because it's a pretty substantial increase in how much we actually have to come up with.
This year you're coming up with 6.185, 6.2 billion.
That's
Is
the
that correct?
GRF portion, yes.
Yeah.
And then next year would be from $5 billion. And I thought his was something like 8.
6.9.
Okay, well, that's,
Here's what he
But
did,
he
he
has a
stretched it out
lower-
to 57. Originally, he was thinking sooner, and you guys raised some more taxes to do it. But this, it looks like he
Yeah.
made the window so long that it was
Yeah.
something that the
You
legislature
know,
could swallow more easily.
yeah, well, they really ought to get off that, I mean, they should be more worried about, if the, to talk about taxes, actually raising taxes, when what they really should be concerned about is $5 billion in taxes going away on January 1st, 2015. That's where I think their focus ought to be, okay? And that is something which would be the subject matter of the gubernatorial campaign. So, now, we in the Senate have always been interested in tax reform. When we passed the income tax the first time, in the light of day, in not at 12:30 in the morning, but at some time in May in the afternoon, we increased the applicability of the sales tax to services. We've already included that. There's no argument philosophically with many people in the Senate. That would be something we could consider. But I think that would have to be a bipartisan effort and would have to probably be in the framework of a revenue-neutral bill, because, you know, you're raising the sales tax on folks. It's pretty regressive, so you'd probably have to lower the rate to make it reflect the economy, with the fact that there's so many services, more services that people use than goods as over the past 40 years. That part's fine. But this notion of having to have no sacrifice from the pensioners and have us just raise taxes and then spend it on them. So, well, just think, what if we had $2 billion in new revenues? Why not do a new capital bill? Why not do a capital bill that this time would be, you know, $50 billion instead of $31 billion? Or why not spend more money on human services,
Or why not
which have
pay the
been,
old bills?
or pay the old bills? So you know, that's why I think our proposal, Senate Bill 1, we put in their preferred version because they asked for it and because it saves more money, and who knows, maybe it's constitutional. If it's not, then we've got our bill, which saves an enormous amount of money, stabilizes the cost of pensions in our budget, and then allows us to go on and take on these other tax reform bills, including, you know, doing something with the elimination of the tax increase on January 1st, 2015.
Is the problem more with Martiri's thing more that Wall Street won't like it, you won't help your bond rating, and they don't like it when you put off stuff like this?
I think that,
bigger issue?
you know, I don't think that these Wall Street folks are any more sophisticated than just people who just read the paper, quite frankly. And I think we've kind of, you know, we're the worst in the nation for unique reasons. But I think if we had a solution, if it's Part B, I think they would find it to be very acceptable, especially in light of the fact that they always say, make sure it's constitutional. And that's what I would argue ours clearly is.
Do you have an indication from the Speaker if Senate Bill 1 could pass the House?
Well, his position has always been, he'd be happy to pass anything, you know, that he can get 60 votes on. Seriously, I mean, I told him about Senate Bill. He was in the room when I offered Senate Bill 1. It was Cross who said no.
Was he okay with it, though?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, but he doesn't, you know, this idea that the Speaker can order up votes whenever he wants it is not true. First of all, he doesn't have as many Democrats as we have in the Senate. So he doesn't have as many people he can just order around and say, here, vote for this bill, okay? He's got the same issue over there that I have. The only difference, I think, is that Senator Radogno has indicated a willingness to not only work with me, but also put votes on a bill such that we passed one, right? And she's willing to do the same now. I hope that Tom Cross is. I mean, he certainly shouldn't reject this concept of Senate Bill 1. We're passing his bill. making it primary. It's presumed to be constitutional. The court has to consider it. They can't look past it and say, oh, well, we like Part B more. They have to consider Part A. By law, they have to. It's the way the court has to rule. That's what's in front of them.
Isn't this a common legal concept anyway, when you're arguing a case where you don't like my A argument, here's my B?
It's called arguing in the alternative. Happens
Right.
all the time, of course.
Whatever happened to the cost shift? Because I think it was last year you
Yeah.
were pushing that hard. So where is that gone for the
Well, my concern was that if we didn't include it in this, it would be really difficult to pass, and we'd be giving it up, okay? And that still is a concern, but I'm heartened by the fact that Redonia was indicated. She said, look, there's different people that want to vote on two different bills, and we can work, and she has some concerns about the cost shift, which I felt we could make some concessions and reach an agreement. But conceptually, she knows, and some pretty conservative folks like the Civic Committee say, you got to do something about this cost shift. You can't let school districts negotiate contracts and send the bill to somebody else and not pay anything into the pension system. And that's what it is for TRS, SURS. And community colleges are included in that. And so she's in favor of the concept, and we will put some votes on it. What she was concerned about is the uncertainty for the school districts of knowing how much money they have to pay. I remember coming to you guys and talking about this, and your local school districts would tell you, oh, this is going to bankrupt us, because they were, if you don't have this pension reform, the normal costs remain real high, and that's the stuff we want them to start to pick up. But if you pass a pension reform, the normal costs come down dramatically. And then it's easier for them to see how they can pay this out. And our thinking has evolved. We're at the point where it's over 12 years. It's expected to be over 12 years. It's 0.5% of payroll that you'd have to start to contribute each year, increasing by 0.5%. That gives you time to negotiate your contracts. In the case of the teachers, do you know that the TRS assumes that you're going to earn 8% interest over 30 years on your investments, but it also assumes that you're going to get a 7% pay raise every year for 30 years? So if it's less than 7%, that means it's less money that you have to put into the pension system. So
I realize they assume 7%.
Yeah.
That's step, and so.
Yeah.
Is that 0.5% per year for 12 years? Is that in Senate Bill 1?
No, we at her request.
It's out. That's right. Yeah, I thought it's out. So when does it come back in, or when? What are you trying this year?
We're talking about a separate bill.
After
Yes,
you pass the first bill.
probably.
For this year. Okay.
To guarantee that those normal costs are going to be reduced, and then we say, look, you got to start pitching in. Okay? And we made a lot of progress. This is where we spent a lot of our time, with the university presidents, with the community colleges, and with school administrators. And, I would say there were pretty civil conversations. I mean, they sort of acknowledged it. They were concerned about, well, what if the stock market crashes and then this normal cost accelerates? It's more money than we expect. What if Springfield starts passing pension benefits again? And that increases it, okay? So those are the issues we want to try to address for Senator Redonia.
Is that where the compromise could be? You guys leave some of the costs with the state maybe to alleviate that?
The state could take the risk of the normal cost increasing.
Yeah.
That would be the biggest thing we can do for them. Just say, here's the schedule, here's how much you're going to have to pay, and no more, no less.
So you think you can pass both of these this year? You hope, Senate Bill 1?
Well, I certainly hope so, but this, I mean, this is a heavy lift. It's the most important bill we could probably pass. It's not just this year, it's generational. It's 30, or in Ralph Martire's case, 47 years, or however many years he wants to spread it out. So, it's something which is, it's critical.
We talked a little bit about the income tax increase expiring and tax reform and expanding the sales tax lowering rate. Does the state, is it collecting enough revenue right now, do you think? Is this the amount of revenue we should be collecting? Or when those efforts start to begin, will you be looking to increase revenue again?
You know, I got to tell you, what I did at the City Club for the folks in Chicago was just kind of start to educate them about what the budget is all about.
Yeah.
First of all, the fact that nobody knows this, that there's actually a $66 billion budget, not a $33 billion budget, the other state funds.
Right.
Those balances, by the way, the top 15 funds have $1.2 billion in the checking account right now. If those were collapsed into one general revenue fund, it would certainly, the money's already earmarked, but it would certainly help the cash flow.
Yeah.
I showed where we get our money from for our general revenue fund. I mean, it's mainly income tax. 46% is income tax. The corporate income tax is only 6.3%. Sales tax is less than 20%. And then I showed the history of the taxes. You can probably appreciate that. So Ogilvy, the income tax went from 0 to 2.5%, which to me is higher than a 2% increase. It's a 2.5% increase. Kind of wrecks the party when the Republicans like to say it's the largest tax increase in the history of the state. And when I pointed that out to them, I said, Ogilvy's was 2.5, ours is only 2. They actually said with a straight face, yeah, but it's more money now. I said, oh, you mean not adjusted for inflation? It's actually more money in 2013 than it was in 1970? It's John Tillman told me that. The Thompson increased the taxes. I voted for him. Temporary twice. Our personal income tax rates compared to other states, lower than all our surrounding states, with the possible exception of Indiana, which is just slightly lower, because Indiana has county taxes, income taxes.
Yeah.
When you add those in, some counties are higher than Illinois. The average is a little bit lower. But if we go back down to 3.75, we'd be dramatically lower than Indiana. So this is something, to me, nothing's going to happen this year. The Republicans aren't going to have an epiphany and say, let's do tax reform.
Yeah.
They did on driver's licenses and maybe even marriage, but I doubt that that's going to happen. And so what's really going to be critical is for you guys next year, or this year, when people are running for governor, both parties, just say, how are you going to balance the budget?
Senator, I want to thank you for taking the leadership on so many fiscal issues when there's been a lack of leadership on the executive side. But still, we have $8 billion in unpaid bills.
Well, we took the leadership in that, too. We passed the bill,
Right.
And we need 3/5 vote. And we did it when we had the 3/5. Now we're back to having 3/5, more than 3/5. Largest Senate caucus in America. Largest Senate Democratic caucus in the history of the state.
So what's the plan for eliminating the backlog of bills? Because it's crippling everything.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? We have a window here where in the Senate, there's not a lot of contested races next year. So we really have many folks with 4-year terms. And it's been a political problem with the Republicans claiming that we're borrowing more. We're the party that borrows. And because I've read your editorials, and it's absolutely true. We've already borrowed the money. We're borrowing it from our vendors, not our lenders. So when we propose the solution of going out and selling bonds and paying off old bills, are we borrowing more money? Yes. We're borrowing the interest rate, which is 4% over 10 years. It's probably a total of about $1.2 billion. If you borrow $8 billion, it costs you $9.2, spread out over 10 years. Plus you save the money that you otherwise lose on the Prompt Payment Act, and it helps the economy by pumping $8 billion into the economy, especially this economy, because this is where a lot of the money's owed, I take it. And it makes all the sense in the world. You wouldn't be a deadbeat anymore. You get more people willing to bid on state projects, goods and services, because they know they're going to get paid. And when you owe money to a bank, or when you owe money to pension systems, it goes off the top. So they definitely get paid. And look to the fact that this year in our budget, we even put aside $1 billion to pay old bills. We could just as easily have taken that $1 billion and paid the bank for the money that we borrowed. So I'm all for it. We'll talk to our caucus. We have some new members who maybe be a little gun shy that just came through elections, tough elections. We have to focus on getting them to be willing to vote to borrow this money to pay old bills.
And again, about the House, they have, all of them are elected every 2 years, so.
That's the problem. And they only have, as I pointed out, they have 71. If we had 36, we'd have the same as the House. We have 40. So we have more Democrats. And, they've never voted on this. So, theoretically, on something this sensitive, they should start first. Because if they can pass it, then it'll be easier for us to pass it. So I'll talk to the Speaker about it.
Well, if the income tax goes away, you're actually losing revenue at the same time you're increasing debt. I think that's a problem.
If the income tax goes away, you just have to have these guys who are running, or women, just ask them for their pie charts on what they're going to do with the $5 billion cut in revenues when the income tax goes away.
A lot of them are going to say, we'll tell you when we get there.
Yeah.
That's been my experience.
Well, there's nobody better than that than Jim Thompson and Dr. Bob Mandeville. Oh, my God. If I had known this during the election, Joan, I would have actually talked about it. That's what he
Speaking
said.
of coming elections, we've heard about Bill Daley, Lisa Madigan, there's Pat Quinn. Do you, as a leader of your party, think it's a good idea for your party to have a primary battle next time? Because last time this happened big time, there was 26 years Republican governors.
Well, there was a primary
Yeah, no, that's
the
true,
last
yeah.
time. Yeah,
Well,
it was close.
Last time they defeated a sitting governor, I guess.
Well, I guess you could argue that Pat Quinn became a stronger candidate because he had to hold off Dan Hines.
Are you for anybody yet?
No, we weren't even the last time. The Speaker and I, we're sitting there in a caucus that has different points of view. So, look, I get elected in my district, and then I get elected from these 39 other folks, and that's who I work for, my constituents and these guys. I'm not a statewide candidate myself, and if I have different caucus members that have different people they support, as was the case in Hines, we just didn't endorse anybody and let the people decide.
You're planning to stay out of this one, too?
Yeah.
What about the Speaker's, if the Speaker's daughter is in there, do you foresee problems with him working with the governor as he's trying, presumably, to defeat the governor in the primary? Do you feel that might muck up some of the things we talked about in terms of trying to get stuff done?
Yeah.
pensions and other
Well,
things?
the only thing, look, this whole issue of Lisa Madigan and Mike Madigan, if she runs for governor, she would be, the electorate would be aware of the fact that her father's the Speaker, and they would decide whether they want to vote for her or not. And the same thing is true 2 years from now. The Speaker runs for Speaker, and it's his members, they would
I guess I'm not even-
vote yes or no based on whether or not, and if Lisa had just gotten elected governor, they would have to make that decision.
I'm not even talking about his
If you're talking about
relationship
between
with her.
now,
I'm talking about his working relationship with Quinn as
Yeah.
he tries to.
Yeah. It would be unusual, I would give you that much, if she's running and he decides to be neutral in that race when his daughter's running. It was a little easier with Dan Hines to be neutral. So I know I'm going to be neutral, and I do know that I'm not a member of the Madigan family, so that if I'm the president of the Senate and she's the governor and he's the Speaker, that I'm going to continue to represent my caucus, and if we don't agree with each other. The Speaker and Lisa Madigan have different, Lisa's a constituent of mine. We have different views on politics, even though we're both in the same party, and it would be something which people would just, when they vote, they'd be aware of it. As far as the governor, the Speaker and I have been trying to work with the governor under tough conditions right from the start. We think we've accomplished a lot of things together. And so, but they've all been hard things, We haven't had a lot of things that, where we're passing out the new money to people. It's been asking people to make tough choices. So, and it continues this year.
But getting back to something you said before about pensions being the biggest issue, people have been saying that for 2 years now, at least. What is going to actually trigger something? What do you think it's going to take to actually trigger something?
Every year, another $1 billion, the crowding out becomes more obvious. I saw the headline on your paper today, walking upstairs, it's more crowding out, awareness, just political pressure on people so they take these tough votes. I mean, if there's elements of a compromise, I'm not saying this bill couldn't be amended, right? If Ralph Martire's got a way to cut down on the crowding out by extending the time here, maybe we can do a hybrid. I'm open to anything. It's a Senate bill. If it passes, it can be amended in the House. We're just trying to pass something. So I don't know what else I can do other than introduce a bill and go around and talk to you guys and give speeches and try to get people to vote for it, and including our own caucus, which we'll have a caucus tomorrow night.
When I saw Congressman Schock speaking to a Republican group the other day, he said something that I hear a lot of. Well, if you want to see what happens when you put Democrats in charge of everything, just look at Illinois. That's not what we want in Washington. Kind of making fun of Illinois being 50th in this and low job creation. How do you respond to just that general criticism that Democrats have been in charge for a while, and Illinois' rankings on various issues and the budget situation is not good?
Yeah. Well, first of all, with the Democrats being in charge, we've passed a lot of very significant pieces of legislation, including pension reform for new hires, which the unions opposed. McCormick Place, which the unions opposed. We passed a major workers' comp legislation, which was not easy to do, given all the interest groups that were opposed to it. We passed education reform that the unions actually did support, which was major. Our income tax, even after an increase, is much lower than most of our neighbors. We do, though, have a specific problem with pensions. The reason why we have it in Illinois is because of this unusual anomaly of the local school districts in 80% of the state, and the universities being covered as state employees, even though they're not, and not pitching in anything to those pensions. There's only 14 states that have that. Coupled with our Constitution, which makes it difficult to do or impossible to do what Rhode Island just did, which was pass a law lowering the pension benefits. So that's why that particular issue is a problem. Now, if Congressman Schock wants to look at the roll call that we took in the Senate, we got 12 Republicans, or maybe 14 Republicans, so that means there were 7 that voted no, probably some of the people from down here. So he can ask, whoever voted no, I don't know who they would be, that was in his congressional district, why they voted no. Maybe Darren LaHood might be one of them, I don't know. So it's just, it's not serious. If you want to be serious about the pension problem, recognize that it's a bipartisan problem, not a Democratic problem, not a Republican problem, and he should help lobby for our bill.
And how's your February 14th plan going? Is that vote on the marriage equality thing still happening on the 14th?
Yeah, I spent 55 minutes with the Sun-Times editorial board talking about this, and then they asked me about marriage, and I was leaving, and I said, yeah, maybe we can vote on it on Valentine's Day. We're going
try to be like the Sun-Times here.
Yeah. Well, you can't, because you have to start off with Sun-Times is great, by the way. They really are. They're very, very polite and knowledgeable. They don't have an attitude like some editorial boards where they really want to stick it to you. The marriage bill, again, we have more votes apparently, certain votes in the Senate than the House. I'm supportive of it, and we're going to vote on that tomorrow out of committee. And we're working on the language, which will be different than the language that we considered just before. And we would expect that that'll come out of committee, and then perhaps vote on it next week. I mean, if we could vote on it this week, I would, but I think we pick up more votes next week with a little more time.
And how far are we from a concealed carry bill, or are we going to have one?
Well, what's really important, we have to. That's really important.
Unless the rehearing.
Oh, let's assume that the court ruling stands. That's really important for people to understand. If we don't pass a law at all, then you really got the wide Wild
Open
West,
carry.
right? Yeah. And then people can walk around with loaded weapons in their holsters. They can walk down Main Street. So we have to pass a bill, and the burden, is on the folks who are for gun control, and the NRA presumably would have some form of a bill that they would like. So it'll just be we will definitely pass a conceal and carry law that allow people to obtain weapons under some circumstances, and those circumstances are going to all be negotiated, and it'll just be somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, I would guess.
One other question on the income tax. Do you favor a graduated or a progressive income tax?
You don't really need to go through all that effort to do that. If you looked at the bill we passed in the Senate, the one that had the expanded the sales tax to services, we also added
This is the one 2009, I believe?
I think it was, yeah. We raised the corporate tax, we raised the income tax, personal income tax. We increased the earned income tax credit. We increased personal exemptions, and I think we created a family tax credit. And an education tax credit was increased. And I think Ralph Martire, as a matter of fact, weighed in on that and pointed out that you get a real progressive tax without having to go through a constitutional amendment, which is just viewed as a tax increase, which is tough to pass.
So you don't see pushing for that to be on the 2014 ballot or anything like that?
I don't think so at all. That's just my personal view.
But the way to do it later would be tax reform across the board: sales tax, income tax, corporate tax, all of the above.
Yeah, the corporate tax, remember I passed a bill asking the corporations to disclose how much profits. If nothing else, the folks who scream the most were the most interesting, right? Because the ones who scream the most are probably the ones that are not paying taxes. So the corporate tax, I talked to the President of the Senate in Texas, Rick Perry. They don't have an income tax for corporations. They have a tax. It's kind of like a gross receipts tax. Bad word, but that's what they have. So I said, hey, what? And it raises the same amount of money we do. Ours does, proportionate. So I said, well, this is great. We'll just get rid of our corporate income tax and adopt the Rick Perry tax. And if nothing else, we raise the same amount of money, and we send the message that, hey, we got rid of our corporate income tax. He told me that they were thinking of getting rid of their gross receipts tax and going with an income tax, switching over to what we have.
When did you have lunch with Governor Perry?
I met Governor Perry a week before he ran announced he was running for governor. But it's the senator is the guy I talked to. So, the gross receipts tax has a problem because it's, the margins. If some businesses have tighter margins than others, and so it works unfairly. But
it's not based on their profits. That was a big opposition. Right,
yeah,
to it.
That's right. So there's got to be a way to tax corporations in such a way to have them pay their fair share. That would be part of it. Individual income tax rates and expanding services, expanding sales tax to services, and then coming up with the rate.
Would the intent be to be revenue neutral, to basically keep getting revenue at the same rate, or to raise more revenue somewhere? Do you think?
I think it would just be really difficult to raise taxes higher than they are now.
Yeah.
I would think. I think it'd be, but if you start to tax services that are not taxed now, if they grow at a greater rate than the goods economy, then you're going to get more money.
Right.
But that's through growth, not from a rate increase.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
What about taxing pensioners?
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's all, it's all about, it's great to sit here and talk about what's, on paper, but I gave this speech at the City Club, was it 2 years ago? And it was almost comical because I just made the mistake of mentioning that we don't tax retirees. I didn't say I was for it. I just said we don't tax retirees. And the first question was Bob Crawford, I think, from WBBM News. Tell us about your plan to raise taxes on seniors. And I said, I don't have a plan to tax. You're denying So then it was like 2 days. It was the one day of the tax increase and the second day of the 9, or no, retracting from my plan to tax.
But they're very nice at WBBM, right?
Hey, it was state government. They don't cover state government very often. So it's ironic because it's part of the pension issue, right? Is these, in addition to getting the compounded COLA, you're not paying any tax on it. But, I thought we've kicked it around. It's just difficult to pass. It's about $1.3 billion. Rather, we should brag about it and convince people that this is a great place to retire.